Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal. We've officially made it the first day of the 2024 college football season, and a very fitting day to release our official top 25 rankings heading into 2024. Now, this is a consensus ranking between the two of us. We sat down for about 2 hours last night, went back and forth on a lot of these teams, kind of came to a consensus top 25 rankings. Really excited to get into this one. We'll probably go back and look at these top 25 come late November, see how the boys did. Now, I think the most important part about this episode is hearing from you guys in the comment section. There's going to be some disagreements with some of our takes. Dylan, I'm sitting here. I don't even know if I love our top 25. There are a lot of questions about a lot of these teams, so would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. That is always the best part. And just a quick shout out to everybody who's been rocking with the boys in the middle of the summer. It takes a special breed of a college football fan to be talking ball in June and July, and so many of you guys were in the comment section talking ball with us. We can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. Deal without further ado. Let's start at the top, and we don't have to spend that much time on these top four teams because I think this is a consensus. I think if you pull most college football fans who follow the whole college football landscape pretty closely, you're going to see this top four kind of segment emerge, right? Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas. Now, the question is how you stack those teams. We go with Oregon over Ohio State. I know you don't totally agree with that, but that's kind of what we came to. And for me, it comes down to quarterback play. I look at Oregon and say I have a lot more confidence in Dylan Gabriel than I do with Will Howard at Ohio State. And I think, secondly, you look at Ohio State and say, on paper, this is the most talented team we've seen in college football. And quite a long time. This is a silly loaded team. This Ohio State team is going to want to run the football a lot. I think my biggest question mark is, do they have the offensive line, that elite offensive line, to rely on the run game as much as they are going to in the 2024 season?
And they got it on the left side. I'm really comfortable with that side of line of scrimmage. I'm really comfortable with Seth McLaughlin at center. I think, to me, I'm looking at that right side. They didn't really add anyone to that unit, and they didn't play great last year at that spot. So that, to me, will be the question, because if that's good, that defense is going to be unbelievable. And why I probably lean Ohio State is I just think from a physicality standpoint, I see them being able to beat up Oregon possibly a little bit on both sides of the ball. I just think I think the way like Michigan was able to kind of manhandle Washington a little bit, I see Ohio State possibly being able to have that sort of recipe against Oregon, just because I mean, that Ohio State team is just like top to bottom on that defense. Really,
that defense it's full of NFL talent. I mean, most of those guys in the two deep of the Ohio State defense are going to be playing on Sundays. I probably have a little bit more confidence in Oregon and what they did, especially in the transfer portal on the defensive line, to probably handle that. I think Dan Lanning has that team from a line of scrimmage standpoint where it needs to be. That's why I'm a little bit higher on Oregon. But look, if you wanted to go Ohio State, certainly would not be dying on that hill. Now, I think the more interesting conversation is, kind of that 5 through realistically 20. And this is going to be a conversation we have throughout the college football season where we weren't used to debating the number 10 team versus the number 12 team because it didn't matter in the college football playoff race. For a college football fan, this is about to be an extremely exciting season. You see some of these national media curmudgeons get up there and complain about the 12-team playoff. I think it's going to be a blast. I think so many fans are going to be engaged come early November because you're going to see legitimately 20 teams that have a shot to still play for a college football playoff berth.
Because we have like Oklahoma at like 17, 18, kind of in that range. Like, you're really telling me they're that much different than maybe a Tennessee, Penn State, Miami? I think, again, you kind of hit the nail on the head. We never really had to think about that. It was always about that like 4, 5, and 6 kind of thing. That was always where the argument centered around. And whatever happens with the bottom rankings happens. Now it's going to matter. That 12 team is going to matter. And I think you're going to have possibly 10 teams looking out being like, well, we probably deserve
it. And there are probably realistic arguments to be made there. Like you kind of said it, Oklahoma, Missouri, neutral site. I'm not sure I'm like banging the table for Missouri over Oklahoma. Like, that's how close the margins are. Let's dive into some teams that are probably like the biggest talking points. And I want to start with Notre Dame, where you were higher on them. You kind of had them in that 6 through 8 range. I had them through that like 10 through 12 range. We kind of settled that at, I believe that's 10. The biggest question mark I have for Notre Dame is the offensive line. You see a lot of teams across the country have really good football teams, but if you can't pass protect, you can't win on the offensive line of scrimmage, it's really hard to kind of reach that elite tier of college football programs. For this Notre Dame team, we're going to find out real quick. They go on the road to College Station and play one of, if not the best defensive line we see in the country. If Notre Dame goes on the road to College Station week 1, blocks up Texas A&M and wins that football game, my opinion on Notre Dame is going to significantly change the rest of the 2024 season.
I kind of look at comparing them to like Michigan, let's say. I mean, both are going to have really, really great defenses, both all levels, all really, really good, and led by some real stars. I mean, guys like Howard Cross and Mason Graham, and then you look Will Johnson and Benjamin Morrison. Like those guys are all like premier first round kind of caliber guys. I just think you look at Riley Leonard. I don't think people are giving him the credit he probably deserves for the upgrade he is over Sam Hartman. I mean, just his ability to gut games out, be a bit more of a winner, be big in big moments. I mean, you go to that 2022 season in Duke when he was kind of fully healthy and at the height of his powers, he was really good. And that Notre Dame team wins a lot of games. And you look at Michigan, I mean, they got to replace the quarterback. That's a huge, huge thing, I think, that again, and that will – Michigan could be a top 4 team, frankly, and I'm a Michigan fan, so like maybe there's a bit of bias. If Alex Orji plays really pretty good, Michigan's right up there with anyone in the country, but that's such a big if. That passing attack needs to take some steps forward. I think, again, you have the recipe. You've always said this. They have the recipe to win the way they've always won, but I think it's really hard to sustain that without – especially when you lose the amount of talent.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to if Alex Orji allows this offense to be two-dimensional. You know what I mean? Michigan fans have been saying this in the comment section all summer. I completely agree with it. If Alex Orji, he doesn't need to be this prolific pocket passer, but he needs to be capable of doing it. Now, if he's not capable of doing it, it's really hard to beat those elite teams in college football with the one-dimensional offense. But if he's good enough, it makes this Michigan team one of the most dangerous teams in the country. I think another team that we might be a little bit higher on is the Missouri Tigers. You start on the offense. I think this offense on paper is a top 10 offense in the country. 12 months ago, I thought Brady Cook shouldn't have been the starting quarterback in 2023. Massive, massive whiff. I've been wrong about a lot. That was probably one of my worst takes that I've had as a college football fan. Brady Cook took a massive step in 2023. What not enough people are talking about is how good this offensive line is going to be. I think the big question we have with Missouri, and all these teams have like things you like a lot about them, and then there's also some question marks you want to see get answered. For Missouri, it's how good can that front seven be? Darius Smith going down with the injury, we were extremely high on him. You look at all the best teams in college football, those teams that are top 10 in the country, they have elite front sevens. They're able to stop the run, get after the quarterback. We're not sure if Missouri has that elite front seven on defense. If they do, this is going to be a really dangerous team.
They'll be off to the races, and again, I'll have them right with Ole Miss and Alabama. Again, probably not ready to put them there yet because you do have those questions about what that front seven is going to look like, losing that amount of talent, and probably not being quite at the recruiting stage for the past like 5 years, let's say, to build the depth through that unit. Like, again, they do a really good job in the portal. They brought some good guys in. Obviously, the Florida defensive lineman might be a good player for them. He still needs to kind of prove it. So there's a lot of guys who I think need to prove it for this Missouri team. But again, if those guys make the jump that we think they can, and frankly, Missouri's done with other guys, they're not that far away from an Alabama or an Ole Miss, because just looking right now, those two teams I think are quite complete. I think you look at Alabama, yeah, maybe you have a couple questions about the thinness in the secondary, but it's really, really talented. Those young kids are really, really good. The defensive line, linebacker units for Alabama should be great, I think. So I think Alabama, I'm really comfortable with having them at 5. And then Ole Miss they're the real wild card because they could be like as high as 2, and they could also be close to 10. That's kind of where I see. I don't think they drop too much further than that, but they still got to prove it on their line. Yeah. I know we're talking all this like portal acquisitions, but a guy like Walter Nolan still needs to put dominant football on the field consistently. He had the flashes at A&M. You got Princely U. He's shown some really good things. I think he's kind of the guy you look for to be the game wrecker for Ole Miss. I'm looking more at the offensive line for Ole Miss. I still think you want to see that when they go play at Georgia, when they go play in Alabama, they hold their own more. It's really hard to build that through the portal, and that's obviously what they're trying to do. But
We've had that conversation with Ole Miss all offseason. And why we're high on Ole Miss, have them as the number 6 team in the country is, they have elite difference makers on offense. That team is going to put up so many points. Can they look like Georgia and Alabama along the lines of scrimmage? We think they've done that in the transfer portal. But again, there's an element of we want to see it manifest itself. We trust Alabama and Georgia a little bit more to year in, year out, have elite line of scrimmage play. Can Ole Miss have that in 2024? And if they do, again, talked about a very dangerous team. Tennessee, I'm not going to spend too much time. We're higher on Tennessee than most. Everybody wants to talk about Nico. I don't think enough people realize how good that Tennessee front seven is, how good the offensive line is, the wide receivers that they either have coming back out there, they've gotten through the transfer portal. There's a lot of other aspects around this Tennessee team that we feel really good about outside of just Nico. And then Miami coming in over Clemson and Florida State. That's going to be a very hot take. I don't even know how I feel. I
can't parse those three out because Miami hasn't really played really good football, and it feels like forever. But they're so loaded. I look at a great offensive line. You bring in Cam Ward. You have a lot of good, exciting wide receivers. And then the defense, that defensive line is going to be great. Again, if their secondary can just kind of maintain itself, I think, at least in part, obviously, they got to replace a lot of guys, but a bunch of young, talented players. They've recruited the spots pretty well. Miami's kind of the wild card because they can go play with anyone if
what makes it
on the field, but you still have the questions about what Mario Cristobal can do as an in-game coach.
Agreed. I think on paper, what really this is I say this all the time. This is the exact same conversation we had with Texas last year, where it's like, all right, we've heard the Texas hype. What separated Texas last year was the line of scrimmage play. I think that's what separates Miami. Kind of similar conversation with Tennessee. Everybody wants to talk about Nico. Everyone wants to talk about Cam Ward. Though the line of scrimmage play, I think, could be elite for Miami. And that's kind of what makes me a believer in them. Now, Clemson's an interesting story where if that offense, Kay Klubnik year 2 with Garrett Riley, if it just takes a marginal step in the right direction, that defense is going to be sick. Florida State, you have to replace a lot of NFL talent, but we probably have the most trust in Mike Norvell to replace that talent. We're going to find out.
I think people perennially doubt or underestimate that Mike Norvell's kind of got his winning culture in place. It took him a little while. And people maybe can't get rid of the stink that they were more of that 8 to 9 win team. That's what they were going to be. That's what Mike Norvell is as a head coach. I think he's kind of broken through that point. And once you do it, everyone's got to replace guys. Everyone who's good loses guys to the NFL. That's why they were good, but they can reload it. I think Florida State, that's kind of my X factor for them is they work the portal really, really well. They identify guys good, and it all has come together in the past couple of years. But also they kind of got their foundation. They're starting to pick their recruiting up. They're starting to build their pipelines a little better. That's kind of where I see Florida State right now. And that's probably why they'll look at this ranking. If I'm a Seminole fan, I'd be like, well, these guys are idiots because we got the call. We're beating these teams now. That's just what we do. We line it up and we beat them.
Yeah, I don't feel great about it. I mean, Florida State.
They're not wrong because they have to beat those teams.
And one thing that we can't overlook, Mike Norvell hits in the portal. You talk about teams, there's a difference between teams just grabbing as many bodies in the portal as they can and then hitting on the players you get. The hit rate for Florida State and Mike Norvell, I don't know what they're doing in the personnel department, elite at getting guys from the transfer portal and having them be difference makers. LSU, I think we're on consensus. Utah, we're on consensus. Oklahoma, probably on consensus, maybe a little bit higher than most, but I think we have a little bit more confidence in the offensive line than some other people do. Texas A&M and USC, probably a little bit higher. I'll go defend the USC Trojans first because that's where you were a little lower on them than I was. They're the 5th best team in the Big Ten right now in our rankings. I think I feel comfortable with that. You look at USC and everybody wants to talk about the question marks on defense. My argument with that would be we just saw Dan Lynn turn over defense in UCLA in 1 year. Now, am I saying USC is going to have a top 15 defense like UCLA did last year? No, but they don't need to be a consensus top 20 team. I look at the offense and say that is one of, if not the best offense that we see in the Big Ten. I think everybody wants to ask the question about how can USC come into the Big Ten and hold up along the lines of scrimmage. The question I'd ask people is how does the other Big Ten teams in this conference deal with the firepower that USC has on offense? Are these other Big Ten teams like Iowa and Nebraska, Minnesota, are they able to hang with USC in the speed and the firepower and the weapons they have on offense? That's a question that nobody wants to talk about, but I think a very important question about USC heading into the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with that. I don't disagree inherently with USC being the 5th team in the Big Ten because I look at Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska. Like those teams can't score with USC. I think I feel pretty comfortable about that. And I'm not sure they're like going to be able to smother the way a Michigan can or the way an Ohio State can, like those teams that even I shouldn't leave out Penn State because Penn State's very much in that realm where they're just so much more well-developed on the lines of scrimmage, especially on the defensive lines. Where I look at USC, they still have so much work to do on the defensive side of the ball. And I get the D'Anton Lynn argument. I also think people kind of underestimate the fact that D'Anton Lynn had like 5 pros on that defensive line at UCLA. And I look at USC, I don't know that we know for sure that there is more than one in Bear Alexander.
I think that's very true. I think
he's probably one too, but I'm not sure. He's certainly not what those UCLA guys were.
I think that's fair. You look at UCLA last year. I mean, Latu was probably the best pure pass rusher we saw in the country last year. The Murphy brothers, who actually ended up not getting drafted to the NFL, they were. I know, but I wouldn't argue with those. Were 2 really good football players. Right. Does USC have the personnel in the front 7 to be difference makers like UCLA was? Probably a question. But I think I'm a believer in the talent level on that defense. We spent a lot of time talking USC, like going back and watching those games in 2023. I'm not
going to score a lot of points. I don't disagree. I'm
not a football genius still. I ain't a football genius. I only play Madden. That being said, that defense was so poorly coached last year. Like when you see a true freshman edge rusher trying to run with wide receivers in man coverage, like that's when you know that was a problem last year with Alex Grinch.
And I'll be honest though, I look at I don't disagree with USC in terms of the Big Ten. I look at teams like Kansas State, NC State, even a Kentucky or Kansas. Like those are maybe not Kansas. I probably shouldn't. I think I can get with those other 3 schools. I said those 3 teams I think are quite a bit more complete. I look at NC State. I think they kind of have the firepower to compete with big dogs now. I almost think they might be a little low on this list. I like the way they just coach and develop defense at that school. They haven't had a quarterback who's really particularly great in it feels like almost 10 years.
This is NC State's best team under Dave Doran. I might be higher on NC State too.
NC State should probably be above USC in my mind. Kansas State, same thing, because Kansas State now also has a quarterback who's really good.
So NC State, very much believer. My question for NC State is I said they have the most talent Dave Doran's ever had. I still don't know if it's at that level that we're starting to talk about. But you talk about difference makers on offense with the insertion of Grayson McCall and obviously Casey and Noah Rogers. Like that's a massive step in the right direction. NC State team is dangerous. Kansas State, you're higher on Kansas State than me. That's very clear. I
have them winning the Big 12.
I still have question marks. One, you replacing some legitimate dudes on the offensive line in Cooper Beebe. Avery Johnson, am I maybe sleeping on Avery Johnson? Absolutely. We saw Avery Johnson come in and spot duty and play some really good football. We haven't really seen Avery Johnson play and kind of show that he's a consistent thrower of the football at a very high level.
You're making the argument people made about J.J. McCarthy in 2021. Oh, he's just a runner. He came in spot duty and you saw him fumble and do all this. And then he was ranked really high. Somebody thought he could throw the ball. Obviously, when he came out of high school, we knew the talent was there. He just wasn't the guy taking the rep. It's really hard to look like a great passer when you're not taking the reps, you're not building the chemistry. Yeah. They have really good wide receiver play. I just believe in the factory that is Kansas State offensive line.
Really good wide receiver play. Quinn.
That might have been a stretch. I think they have a talented enough room to be better than what they were last year.
Yeah, and I think for Avery Johnson too, there's an element of, hey, they went with Avery Johnson over Will Howard. They kind of told Will Howard, from what it sounds like, to hit the transfer portal. He ends up going to Ohio State. And so they might have something for real with Avery Johnson. I'm a huge Avery Johnson guy. I just want to see it a little bit more consistently before I put them. Because if Kansas State's going to be a top 15 team in the country, they got to have a dude at quarterback. I think Avery Johnson could be that. Might be an element of just wanting to see it a little bit. It's going to be a fun one. Dill, kind of rounding this list out, Auburn is probably the last team that we are significantly higher on than most. I don't think you see a more improved team in the country than Auburn. Yeah, I think Peyton Thorne gets better going into year 2. Hugh Freeze is going to have a little bit more of a heavy hand on the offense. There are reports from spring practice and fall camp that Peyton Thorne looks significantly better. People forget that, Peyton Thorne came in late in the summer last year, and they were just cobbling together this roster. They still won 6 games. I think they get significantly better in the offensive playmaker situation. Rivaldo Fairweather was their pass catcher 1 last year. Now you have Keandre Lambert-Smith and Cam Coleman. I think the defense is certainly getting there. You can see Hugh Freeze compiling that talent. I think Auburn takes a massive step in the right direction. Again, I think Peyton Thorne is not a good enough quarterback to put them in the top 15. That roster is quickly becoming one of the more talented rosters we see in college football. And then Arizona, Kansas, and then Kentucky to round it out. Any teams that you want to dive into on that back half here?
No, I'm comfortable with where we have Arizona, Kentucky, or Kansas, I should say. I think those two teams, like, they have really good elements. I mean,
Yes.
both really good offenses. Just talent to talent. They don't seem like they're that close to the big dogs yet. I just like the way they've recruited, the way obviously Arizona kind of had some turnover. I mean, they do have McMillan and obviously the quarterback.
I'll say Noah Fafita, and I'll say this: like, Arizona is a team that I think the country might be just too high on. Yes, they have Noah Fafita and T-Mac, and that's going to make you such a dangerous team. But that rest of that roster it's really turning over. They're losing, especially along the line of scrimmage. So I have question marks about, especially going into the Big 12, where you're going to see a little bit more physicality along the line of scrimmage. My question is, can Arizona kind of hold up against some of those teams in the Big 12? Kansas has just a ton of offensive production returning. Kentucky with Brock Vandagriff,
Kentucky's another X factor team that if Brock Vandagriff plays really good, I mean, they had bad quarterback play at Devin Leary. That was like preposterous what they were getting out of him last year. I was really disappointed in what his season was, just given what you saw the flashes. You thought he could be good. Obviously, it just didn't work. But
we really didn't see the flashes of that. Like, Devin Leary was a solid quarterback in the ACC, and
like that. Probably just looked at it in comparison to other NC State quarterbacks. Like, ooh, they have something.
Yeah. I thought Devin Leary. And I'm not right on a lot, but we had question marks about Devin Leary last year. Teams to watch: Nebraska. If they get good quarterback play, that's an elite defense. Virginia Tech returns pretty much their whole roster of a team that you can kind of feel turning the page. Louisville.